As LPAC organizers fan across the 50 states in order to mobilize national support for NAWAPA 21, LPAC-endorsed candidate Bill Roberts of Michigan has spent the week organizing with fellow candidate Dave Christie throughout Washington state. At the culmination of the first leg of their organizing tour, Dave Christie hosted a town hall meeting at which Bill Roberts addressed the issue of what are we going to do about the Greenies. As support for NAWAPA 21 and the accompanying emergency resolution grows, LPAC has decided to present to you Roberts' presentation in full so that in your organizing you too can nip the Greenie nuisance in the bud and start the United States on the path toward economic recovery and restoring the United States system of public credit.
So, we've seen the plan, and this is a plan whose time has come, and it is a plan without which no jobs, no water, and no food security. So it will work. But as Dave mentioned, what most people immediately say is, okay, that's great. Great plan, jobs, water, 25 years. Put the young people back to work, great. But one, how are we going to pay for it? And two, what the hell are we going to do about the Greenies? Now, I think Dave covered really the first question, which, you know, for dumb people, you can just say, well, don't worry, it's on the House and the Senate. But the other question, what are we going to do about the damn Greenies? This requires some discussion, because I think the question has to be made, in a certain sense, a little bit more clear. You know, because this is the largest development project, environment-altering, weather-changing project ever undertaken by mankind, period. This is going to change the environment. This is going to take rivers from one stream and put them in another. You know, it's going to be a major industrial project. So what are we going to do about, you know, the people who won't even let us dig a gravel pit out on the Olympic Peninsula, who are afraid that the barge canals are going to crash into the bridge, even though there's nuclear submarines there? But that's a different whole question. No, like the problem really is, if we're thinking about it correctly, this would not really be that big of a deal at all if we hadn't lost a sense of mission, and a sense in the culture of a mission orientation and a commitment to the future that we had before Kennedy was shot. And this was Kennedy's plan. This is something Kennedy pursued. Both John F. Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy were behind this. When they were out of the scene, Frank Moss took this up as a senator from Utah. But it was exterminated during the Johnson administration. He was favorable to the idea, but he knew that it wouldn't be taken up in the period of in which everything that the Congress was doing was dominated by the discussion of the Vietnam War. And so even the committee that had done all of the feasibility studies on this and everything else, that committee was shut down. So really what we're talking about is that there's been a transformation of the political culture in which, because the kind of, even the language that we use to talk about what we do and even what people do is not so much the idea even of the general welfare, of the commitment to a mission which is good for everyone, isn't even a part of the thinking process. We think in terms of what's my little issue. And when people go out and vote, they say, well, we can't really change the world. We can't really deal with all these big problems. I'm just going to vote for my little issue. And even though most people generally know that there's something wrong with shutting down people's jobs to save an earthworm, or killing grandma in order to, cut the budget and save money to bail out Wall Street or something like that.
Different kind of earthworm.
What's that?
They're a different kind of earthworm.
Yeah, different kind of earthworm. Even though most people don't really believe in that stuff, they say, well, you got to go along with it. You have to make concessions. The environmentalists are so loud, you have to make concessions to these people if you don't want, the right-wing budget cutters to take over or something like that. So really, we're dealing with a phenomenon which has been a problem in American history, which is known as this question of sectionalism, or you could even just simply call it democracy or Jacksonian democracy. Now, where does environmentalism, we'll come back to that question, where does environmentalism actually come from? Where does the belief, because what is environmental? Monetarism is the belief that things have some intrinsic, everything has an intrinsic monetary value. Money has some intrinsic value. And so a dollar is a dollar. When you got to cut the budget, it doesn't matter what you're cutting from. You just cut across the board. That mentality. Environmentalism, on the other hand, is the belief that we human beings, we're creative. We invent things. We change things. We build things. These things come from the mind. But the rest of the universe doesn't work that way. The rest of the planet doesn't work that way. It's fixed. It doesn't change. It's closed. It's a fixed system. So the more we change and the more we progress, the more we're just screwing up the environment. We're screwing up this fixed system. Now, where does this, that's not a scientific idea in the least. Where does it come from? Well, it goes back to the creation of the British East India Company. When the Empire of Venice shifted northward in the 1600s, in the period of the turmoil of the religious wars and so forth, they shifted north. The Empire of Venice had controlled the sea routes. They had controlled the insurance. They controlled the finance. You had to come to them. If you got outside of the control and you didn't need their monetary system, they send the Crusaders after you. They start wars. So it's a system of control of money and genocide. In the period in which much more of the economy was shifting to the northern sea routes, Venice shifted north. They created the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company. Now, they became a global, you had literally the Venetian party came to dominate London and the British government. They took over. And an international cartel called the British East India Company dominated politics. And what they did was they ran monocrop operations, the potato famine in Ireland, the famines, the periodic famines that killed millions in India, were based on a free trade policy. And the apologist for, even though it was the policies of buying cheap and selling dear that were, and not investing anything into improving the population, but looting the hell out of them in Africa and India and Ireland, they said, and it was Thomas Malthus and others working for the British East India Company who were employed to apologize for the British East India Company and say, no, really what the problem is, what Malthus said, is that the problem is that population grows exponentially and food supply, agriculture grows exponentially, which was really just an excuse for, there may be some truth to that if there's no technological improvement, but essentially it was an excuse for a system that looted the most they could from the population and gave nothing back for the development of that population. For decades upon decades, this was how the British Empire has operated. Now, and he said, Mouth has said, the more population, the more poverty, and the more misery. Now, the American system economists proved exactly the opposite. Henry Carey, Lincoln's chief economist, wrote volumes on how this was simply not true. Actually, the more the population there is, the more wealth, the greater the division of labor, the more you can actually move from lower quality agricultural land to higher quality agricultural land that was less accessible but required more concentration of labor. The American experiment was based on the exact opposite paradigm as the British Empire. But it did not, because of the French Revolution and other things, Napoleon, Europe stayed under the system of oligarchism. And so we saw the expression, the highest expression of this idea that human beings are just an extra cost under the Nazis. The Nazis believed in the utilitarian idea that even human life, as we see with the useless eater policy of Obama's Affordable Health Care Act, they were the original ones taking this British utilitarian idea of all human life having a monetary cost and eliminating the useless eaters. Now, that wasn't a very popular idea come the end of World War II. The British financiers who had sponsored Hitler said, well, we still want our empire. We still want our system of population reduction. We still want everything that we believe in, eugenics, the idea that the improvement of the human species comes through eliminating the genetically inferior. But we can't be so explicit about the fact that the policy is a policy of population reduction, especially in the darker-skinned nations. And so people like Prince Philip and Julian Huxley said, well, we'll just call it conservationism. And we'll make everyone believe. We'll form foundations called the World Wildlife Fund, the British Zoological Society, and we'll make everyone believe that it's all about saving the furry little animals. And that this thing's going to go extinct. And they put out volumes and volumes on these endangered species that no one even knew about before they came along. No one cared at all about the, three-horned ibis of East Africa until Prince Philip came along and just started. And Prince Philip and Prince Bernard of the Netherlands, who had been a card-carrying Nazi, literally, formed this grouping in Britain and then said, but it's really not our idea, and they would have it headquartered and make it always look like it was something that was coming from these other nations of the Commonwealth and of Europe. So that's environmentalism. It's a policy of empire. Right now, we're seeing a situation where the British Crown itself is coming out very explicitly in terms of what this agenda is really about. They just released this Royal Society report, and the Royal Society is supposed to be the scientific sort of arm of the British Empire. That was a society of Isaac Newton, who covered up, the real discovery of gravitation as an astronomical discovery that Kepler had made, and lied that it was just a mathematical derivation. But they just put out this report pushing the idea of sustainability. That the reason why there's so much, the same Malthusian line, the reason why there's so much misery, poverty in the developing sector is because in the developed sector, we just consume too much. Children in the developing sector consume 30 times the amount of water that children in the developing sector do. What are you going to do? You're going to ship the water over there? It's absurd. But they're saying that we have to stop population growth by curbing consumption and then begin to reduce consumption. Eventually begin to reduce consumption. And this is something, the IPCC has done this. The WBGU report on climate change had basically the same exact line: eliminate fossil fuels, even nuclear power. it's all about reducing, they're coming very much out front with the idea that the real agenda right now is reducing consumption. Now, why are they so upfront with this at this moment? The reason why they're so upfront is they really don't have a choice. They cannot continue to exist as an empire if there's nations, if there's a grouping of nations on this planet that are still, that resist, as Dave was discussing, these Pacific-oriented nations, Russia, China, and others, that still resist the policies of bailout and of globalization and these policies that will kill off their population. Russia's been through that. China has faced these types of things, the Opium War. And we're even seeing now that Russia is now, as far as the intelligentsia, is actually engaging in an open discussion with the population on the ideas of Lyndon LaRouche. This is coming out on a website called Terra America. And they publish these interviews with LaRouche. This is the intelligentsia of Russia that's closely connected to Putin and the top academia of Russia, publishing reports on why does the British Empire want to shut down, why did they shut down the Apollo program? What was this all about? Conspiracy theories, right? And so Obama is being deployed as the handmaiden of this British Empire to encircle China, to play this nuclear chicken game. And so what you can see, what's governing the dynamic right now, why the British are actually bringing to the front their true intentions, is because they're going for what they always have stood for. Whether it's the behaviorists or the Greenie crowd, or hardcore fascists, what have you, it's always been a question of boxing in mankind from acting on higher principles. And so they have their keywords like sustainability, and they push the idea that we have to reduce consumption. And they alarm people. Now, if people have been following the website in the recent months, the Wednesday weekly reports have done a very good job of developing this, really a very pedagogical approach to thinking about why this doesn't work, why this is fundamentally goes against the real nature of the relationship between mankind and the universe that we live in. And one way I sort of think about it is that the idea that mankind should right now cut back. Now, I'll just say this. It is true, Dave mentioned that it is true that within any one system, say fossil fuels, or probably even nuclear power plant, power at a certain point, but certainly for fossil fuels and any fixed level of energy flux density in an economy, we are driving ourselves toward extinction if we are staying at that level. We use up the resources faster and faster at that level, or we disperse them, you could say. But the idea that therefore we should slow down and consume less resources, willfully reduce our consumption. I joke around, it's kind of like two guys on an airplane, and they're trying to take off on the runway, and the co-pilot says to the pilot, "Hey, you got to slow down. We're using up all the petroleum. We're gonna use it all up. Slow down." And so you slow down, and you actually do end up using up all the petroleum. You just sit on the runway and you never take off. So that's kind of like what the environmentalist mentality is. Now, like I mentioned before, we're at a point right now where it's simply not a problem of everyone believing in hardcore environmentalism. But what we should recognize is that we have a problem in this country historically with a belief. I'll put it this way. We've gotten out of touch with what the process was, which the American Revolution was all about. We've gotten out of touch with what our Constitution actually represents as a scientifically valid statement of principle. And what I mean by this is that we've had a problem ever since the presidency of Andrew Jackson, that we believe that what has to determine what the laws of the country is pure democracy. And in particular, what I mean is that is the idea, the belief that there is no common interest, and that everyone has their own little set of issues and their little pet issues that they have to line up behind. And if you look at the history of the United States, this has virtually been the core of every single problem that we've ever had that has wrecked this country. And it's always, in the case of Andrew Jackson, he was deliberately deployed to wreck the Alexander Hamilton's second national bank of the United States. He was, and many people think Jackson was this great hero. You know, he extended voting rights to everyone, all white men who have property, and that was a big revolution and all this sort of thing. But Jackson was deployed directly to ruin the second national bank as the instrument of our ability to function as a sovereign nation. Actually, the way that he did this is he promoted the idea. He said, see, because the British were having trouble electing people who were direct and very open agents of the British, East India Company, like Aaron Burr and these types of people. So they brought forward their man, Andrew Jackson, who was a murderer, a complete racist, ran the Cherokees out of the South to expand slavery. And he was put forward, they said, this guy's the champion of the common man, the common man. Jackson is the champion of the common man, and he's against this elite grouping who controls the national bank and who is allied with England. And they promoted this idea that the national bank was just a grouping of elite controlling the nation. And so Andrew Jackson got in there, and he destroyed the national bank purely through an act of tyranny. He took the deposits out of the bank and as a pure act of treason and usurpation. So that's one. Usually that's one way. Slavery was another way that was used to divide the nation, to convince the South that they had, within 10 years of Texas becoming a state, they went from a state that was that saw themselves as part of the Union. They were glad to join the Union. But with the expansion of slavery, they became a state that wanted to secede from the Union by 1850. And at that point, the South, the South of the United States became convinced that that slavery was in their self-interest. And so it actually was the courageous efforts of a few Southerners and Northerners who did not line up, who did very unpopular things and did not get behind their party, either for secession of the South or things they thought would lead to secession. On the one hand, like Sam Houston, the governor of Texas, fought against secession. It fought against the things which expanded slavery. And Daniel Webster of Massachusetts, who fought to fought against the abolitionists and made compromises to keep the country from breaking apart until a later date when the North was powerful enough to intervene and save the Union. So this is the way in which, this is exactly the type of crisis we're facing right now exactly. Is that the American population does not have a unified sense of their own self-interest because they lack generally the sense of principle, which allow them to say, okay, that guy's wrong, that guy's full of shit, I know what to do. So, so this is why, really, this is why right now, NAWAPA, what NAWAPA represents, because it's so big, and it's such a jobs creation program, that it represents a top-down solution, which really, if we can communicate how this is going to function with Glass-Steagall shutting down the speculators so we don't have any more bailouts and hyperinflation, the National Bank to restore public credit, but really building NAWAPA, building up the productive capability of the nation again, that this addresses really everything that most people are actually concerned about, but they don't know that this addresses it. You need money. You're broke. You don't have a job. You want your city to have police so you don't get robbed and killed. You want a good education for your children. All these things, what's the problem? Why are they cutting the budget? Why are seniors afraid that they're going to have their Social Security stolen from them? Why are people concerned that their Medicaid is going to disappear, and is disappearing? Well, it's because everything is under attack right now for austerity. And unless you're going to have something that's going to restore the public credit by putting enough people back to work productively, which actually generates more wealth than goes into it over time, which is the principle of credit, then without that, you will not be able to reestablish the credit of the American people, by which you can actually meet all the obligations of your population without having to kill grandma to do it, without having to choke off your infrastructure to build it, because we're going to build more infrastructure. So this is the top down. This is what we need to unify the country around. This is, really, NAWAPA is today the embodiment of the idea of the general welfare. And so we have a resolution, which, as Dave mentioned, we have a resolution for Glass-Steagall, national banking, and NAWAPA, which we got to get people to realize, whether they're Republicans, independents, Democrats, labor unions, whatever, libertarians, people got to realize that this is the way that they've got to get behind this fight now, before the euro blows out, before Obama, declares himself dictator. So that's the fight, and we have the resolution available. I don't have it right here, but this is something that everyone here should work with us to get city councils, county civic bodies, county commissions, labor unions, and everyone to endorse right now as a groundswell for the solution, and make this the issue of the election. Don't let the election be another clown show where wedge issues are used. Whatever issue can split people more is going to be used if there's not a solution. And it's not that people will be recruited to getting really gung-ho about women not being paid as much, or gay marriage or something like that. It's not that people get gung-ho about it. At this point, people are just getting demoralized because they see how bad the situation is, and they don't see a solution. So this is what we've got on the table right now, and people should join the fight. So that's what I've got.